go from up in Canada to almost to the Mexican border. And there actually are some mat sites in Mexico too. These are a few of them. They're familiar names: Lindenmeyer, there's the mat, Lubbock Lake, Hell Gap, Agate Basin, Fetterman Mammoth, Arlington Springs, California, and a few sites that we found in Europe. This is Faunal in Belgium. You can see the looks almost identical to some of the others. This is a site in the Netherlands and one in Germany. So there's the extent from California to Germany. We find this mat layer. And you'll see a little bit more of what we think it is, but clearly it's impact related. We've tested about half of these sites. Every one of them has ET markers of some kind. So here's what Vance found. He looked at 97 Clovis age sites, and he looked for mammoth, mastodon, horse, camel, bear, saber-toothed tigers, almost all of these extinct animals, and wanted to see how the sediments built up over time. So over time, they formed very slowly, and they trapped the bones of these animals in them. Then, when it got to 12,900 years ago, this layer, this YDB layer that we call it, the underdress boundary layer, was deposited over the bones. And then on top of that, at 70 of the 97 sites that he looked at, the black mat was right on top of the impact layer. So then, over time, the sites went ahead and filled in with sediment up to what we see as the modern surface today. For those sites that all of you are excavating or have been visited, it's the same way. Somewhere below the surface is going to be this impact layer unless it's been eroded away. So here's what Vance found when he started to tally the number of bones that are in this layer. The lower part of it, that is below the impact layer, 77% of those sites contain bones of extinct megafauna. Above it, 0. Not a single bone has ever been found in situ above it. When those animals died, they died right at that boundary, and there were none of them afterwards. And once again, this is third party. We predicted this, but Vance, who's been working on the map for years, published this recently. So there's the basic idea. The impact layer is draped over the bones of the extinct animals. None of them are found above it. They're all found below it. Is that coincidence or part of the impact? So we'll look at that in a minute. But here's what Vance says. He says it appears to have been catastrophic. He thinks it was too sudden or extensive for either human predation, overkill, or climate to have been the primary cause. Secondary, yes, but not primary. So he thinks it deserves further testing. Okay, so let's look at the extent of the evidence. We've so far found 30 sites in 5 countries on 2 continents, from offshore California to Germany, and it's in one thin 12,900-year-old layer where we find the peaks of these things. Covers up to 25% of the northern hemisphere, and we haven't found any limits to it so far. We don't know how big this was. These are the sites at which we found it: Sheridan Cave, Lake Hine, Manitoba, Wally's Beach, and there are several of them up there. Indian Creek, that was found by a 9th grader. Offshore California, Daisy Cave, Arlington Springs, Murray Springs, and Laner. And then an abstract is going to be presented tomorrow at 2 o'clock by some of Vance's collaborators. They confirmed the magnetic spherules at Murray Springs, so we have independent confirmation of that. Blackwater, Bull Creek, Anton Trench in Colorado, some North Carolina, South Carolina, Carolina Bay sites where we find all of these. Topper, and Topper, all the way across into Europe, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And pretty much the same in Europe as there is over here. The markers are the same. And that's 4,200 miles away from Topper. Let's look at a few of the sites. Here's what Murray Springs looks like. And you can see the black mat there in the middle. And there's the YDB layer right at the bottom of that. And matching up with that, and this is the profile that we did across it. You see magnetic grains peak, iridium peaks, soot peaks, and carbon spherules peak. And there's more about these in a minute. There's a big peak in diamonds at Murray Springs. Charcoal peaks there, and magnetic spherules do too. So you can see how all of those peaks line up perfectly with that impact line in the sand. There's another explanation that some people have offered, that there was a hiatus there, that this is stuff that just rains out of the sky every day, and that there was this surface that the Clovis people on had been there for maybe a couple of thousand, 10,000 years, and all of these things have just been falling out of the sky every day. Well, reasonable hypothesis, but it's one that needs to be tested. So could it be accurate? Maybe that could account for all that we're seeing. But here's one of the reasons they couldn't. These are all dates that were taken at Murray Springs by Vance Haynes and just published recently. He did, there's the Clovis dates, the radiocarbon dates, and he looked at 22 dates across the boundary. And what he found was that there was less than a 100-year hiatus, meaning that it could only have been that surface with nothing building up on it, nothing eroding away, could only have been there for less than 100 years, which is not really enough time to see the massive peaks that we see in material. And here's Topper, which is in South Carolina. There's the YDB right there. And you see, once again, matching with it, peaks in glass-like carbon. The magnetic grain peak doesn't match up exactly, but it's close. We see iridium there. We see high levels of chromium, which is the kind of thing that comes in with a meteorite, and high levels of nickel in the sediment too. So is there Clovis hiatus there? Well, it certainly is possible, because we have 12.9 for the YDB, 13,500, so a 600-year gap. So maybe there were 600 years where sediment wasn't building up, and then that one was 15,000 years ago. So possible hiatus, but it's likely too short. So let's look at Blackwater. So Blackwater is the classic type site. It's where the first Clovis point was recognized, most famous of all the Clovis sites. There's the YDB, and you can see it has a black mat too. And it also has peak in magnetic grains, magnetic spherules, iridium, and glass-like carbon. And so is there a possible hiatus there? When we look at the dates, these from Haynes, Vance Haynes, published this quite a while ago, more than a decade ago. There's the Clovis again, and once again, 22 dates that cross the boundary. And Vance himself says in the paper, and this was when he published it more than a decade ago, he says there was no more than a 10-year hiatus at the YDB layer. So 10 years isn't enough to account for these massive peaks that you see sticking out over there, where in some cases you can see here's 0 for the magnetic spherules, and we find about 600 of them in a double handful of sand, of dirt from there. So just a massive peak in spherules. So once again, it seemed like something unusual happened, and it could not have happened gradually over a 10-year span. So with any hypothesis, if a hypothesis predicts that you absolutely have to find something, and you can find a number of sites where that's not true, then it basically falsifies the hypothesis. So that, to us, that refutes it. It's predicted by people that this was a gradual rain over a long period of time. So if we can find even one spot with no hiatus, then that disproves it. And we have 2 out of 3, and possibly 3 out of 3. And next, most everybody has, or almost no one's heard of carbon spherules, and those are pretty exotic. But I'm guessing everybody here has heard of diamonds. And we found plenty of those at the site.